In the process of specializing in hormones and diving into that education and research and learning how to kind of work with my hormones and recognize what's going on, I realized how little I knew about the female body. And if I'm in the wellness industry and I don't know these things, like how are all these other women who are out there like wanting to make their health great, wanting to do these workouts, wanting to feel great, how are they going to get there?
Welcome to the VSHRED Better Body, Better Life podcast, where we help you live your best life while working on your health and fitness goals. We're here to make your journey fun and inspiring.
What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of the Better Body, Better Life podcast. Today, I am here with Bria The Period Whisperer to talk about female hormones, talk about just everything fitness related to primarily women. Guys, we got some stuff in here for you guys as well. But for the most part, we're going to be talking women, and Bria is a functional diagnostic practitioner and female hormone specialist. So we can talk about a bunch of stuff that I don't know that much about, and so I'm very excited for you guys to listen. Welcome.
Thank you.
Why don't you just first off start off by just telling us a little bit about yourself and your background and how you got into fitness in the first place.
Yeah, for sure. So I am a functional diagnostic nutrition practitioner and a personal trainer. And I specialize in female hormones in the perimenopause and menopause years. And I've been in the health and wellness industry for, about 15, 16 years now. And I built my career first in fitness and nutrition, helping women online, which I just loved.
Just all women?
All women.
Okay.
I really specialized in women. I really, it was for me when I was raising young kids, it was sort of my way of finding time for myself, feeling good about myself, and maintaining my health. And so I really love to help other women in that pocket, kind of going through that as well. And then around the age of 35, I really noticed a shift in my clients. I noticed them feeling different in their energy, feeling different in their results, so not getting the same results that they'd been getting. I noticed them start to have trouble with their cycle, their periods, starting to feel like they just couldn't handle what they'd been handling. And then around the age of 37, I really noticed a mega shift in my own body. I started to feel really tired a lot and get what I like to call undeserved weight gain, when you've changed nothing and things in your body start to change. Changes in my own cycle, changes in my sleep. And that was the real kicker, that sleep piece. Like when my sleep started going, I was like, something's not right. I started having night sweats a lot, waking up at the same time every night.
I was going to ask, do you track sleep? Like, how do you go about tracking that?
Yeah. So for me, I'm pretty routine. I feel like a lot of mothers are. Like, we don't have a lot of opportunity except to kind of go to bed, wake up, do our thing.
Yeah.
And sleep has always been a superpower for me. Like, it's like I can handle so much in the day. I crash hard. I sleep solid. I wake up. So when that changed, it was like, oh boy, everything started changing.
And was that a gradual change, or was that kind of like overnight?
Nah, that's a great question. I think it kind of like crept up a little bit, and then it was just consistent, like always there, always waking up in this sweat. And I'm still waking up to try to grind because I felt like I don't have everything figured out, but like as a trainer, I have my fitness and nutrition figured out.
Yeah.
And so when that went, I was like, okay, I should have known when things start to change in your cycle, and all women should know this, you really should go and get a checkup because it's such a vital sign for us. But I waited until like my sleep went off, and off I went to my healthcare practitioner, and she was awesome. She did all the blood work, did all the tests, asked all the questions. And she kind of looked at me and was like, Bria, you're the picture of health. And I remember thinking like, so glad that I don't have all the awful things that you Google. Like when you Google night sweats, like bad stuff comes out. Cancer, MS, you're dying. It's not good. So I was really appreciative to have that, but it was a real dark moment for me because I'm like, this is not only how I make my living, but at that point I was only 37. I'm like 37 and this is the best. I'm the picture of health. I'm like, how am I going to do the next 40 years if this is how I'm feeling? I had, dreams and goals and kids and all these things I wanted to do. And that was what really kind of pivoted things for me to be like, okay, what's going on in the female body? And in the process of specializing in hormones and diving into that education and research and learning how to kind of work with my hormones and recognize what's going on, I realized how little I knew about the female body. And if I'm in the wellness industry and I don't know these things, Like, how are all these other women who are out there, like, wanting to make their health great, wanting to do these workouts, wanting to feel great, how are they going to get there? And so that was a real, like, turning point for me to kind of, head down this path and start sharing and educating in this area for women.
And thus the Period Whisperer was born.
And the Period Whisperer.
So when was that? So when did you start that?
Yeah, so that I started that. Well, we launched the podcast 2 years ago now, so it had been 2022.
Okay.
I'd been obviously done a lot of education and everything before that, and been working with women on what I'd learned, some of the things that had worked for me. But that was when I really launched 2 years ago and started educating in this specific area and really trying to meet women where they were at, normalize the topic, help them understand the difference, because like 50% of women don't know the difference between perimenopause and menopause. I was one of those women, and I was in the industry. So I think just teaching about it, normalizing the conversation, and also correctly talking about it. It's so amazing that it's become such a hot topic, I think, these days. But along with that comes a lot
more awareness around it.
Yeah, along with that comes a lot of capitalizing on it, I think.
Right,
so really trying to get to the truth of it for women was really important to me.
That's awesome. And I was the first male on your
podcast,
podcast,
it
which
was
is an honor.
It was a big day. I had to think long and hard. I'm like, do I want a guy on this show? But you really showed up. You had some great stuff to share.
I appreciate that.
Yeah.
So explain to me and all the listeners the difference between, you said most people don't know the difference between perimenopause and menopause.
Yeah.
What is the difference?
Yeah. So menopause is, which we all seem to be familiar with. It's like what we see on TV. It's
Yeah.
really,
So actually explain menopause as well, just in general.
Yeah. So menopause is actually just one day, 365 days after we stop having a period. So our hormones have reached so low that we're no longer reproductively capable. And it's just one day, and then you're post-menopause. Everything leading up to that is what we call perimenopause or premenopause, or sometimes we'll hear it as the menopause transition. And it starts for all women around the age of 35. Like a puberty, right? So puberty kind of starts around 11 to 13 for kids. Perimenopause starts around, 34 to 37 for women. And it's not a diagnosable condition. So it's a reverse puberty transition. And we can't really go and have that diagnosed. But along with that transition, a lot's going on in our body. And I think this is where we're so uneducated. Like, what's actually happening? It's not just our hormones. They're just being impacted. So I like to explain it as there's 3 major things going on in our body in perimenopause, in this transition. The biggest one, I think, is that whose job in the body is handling this transition or handling these hormones? It was always our ovaries, from puberty until now, it's been our ovaries. Now it's our adrenals. So this transition is happening. And now our adrenals, which are our stress managers, are responsible for so many things in our life. And in our 40s or late 30s to 50s, they're taxed.
Yeah.
Like, they're already really full.
Yeah.
And so
especially if you're on caffeine and all these different stimulants.
Totally. Yeah. You're doing a lot of cardio, you're doing a lot of these things that are stress, and then life on top of that is really stressful. And, our environment, our toxins, everything around us.
Yeah.
So our adrenals are really, really taxed already. And it's almost like you're already juggling 4 balls, someone throws another ball in, something's going to drop.
Yeah.
And that's what we see happen more often. And we think, oh, it's my hormones, but it's not. It's this transition. It's our adrenals handling this new transition. And I think, like any transition, right? Like, for anyone who's ever moved, had kids, gotten married, got divorced, changed jobs, like, transition requires energy. And so we start to feel like we aren't handling things the same. We start to feel more tired. And the body's still trying to manage this and prioritize this transition. So that's when we really start to see symptoms fall into place.
Okay.
The other major thing I think is important to know is that the amount of these hormones are decreasing. So because we're going from being fertile to no longer needing these level of hormones, so we don't have to have babies anymore. And they can actually stay quite balanced if we know what we're doing, if we're honoring our hormones in the process. But the amount are changing. That is going to impact us a little bit. And then the last thing that I don't think we hear enough about is the impact on our brain. So during this transition...
You mean like mental health?
Well, the impact of shifting hormones on our brain.
Okay.
Yeah. So our hippocampus and our amygdala, which are our memory encoders and retrievers in the brain, are really sensitive to the shifting of specifically estrogen and progesterone. And we start to become more aware as these hormones shift and become a bit erratic and decrease. We start to become more aware of past traumas we haven't dealt with, things we've shoved under the rug. Yeah. So people kind of talk about meno rage, I think.
Oh.
But really it's, I think...
Meno rage.
Meno rage.
I've never heard
You've
that.
never heard that? No. Yeah. It's a real term that people say anyway, where we get more irritated, more cranky, I think. And I think we blame it on our hormones, but ultimately the philosophy, I think, the way I like to look at it is from puberty to perimenopause, we have been kind of hormonally hijacked. So for women listening, like estrogen is really like rose-colored glasses. It comes every single month. For half the month, it comes on. And it's really there to make us, well, amenable to reproduce and also prioritize our children's lives over our own so that they survive, right? So to keep the circle of life going. And we reach this age, and now that's not a priority anymore. So instead of having that rose-colored glasses come on, we're actually just really aware of how we feel, of things that aren't working for us. So I really think of perimenopause as happening for us to pay attention to the things that aren't working, things we haven't resolved, and not just to us.
Yeah, and then so how do you make that adjustment as you start feeling things change?
Yeah, so I think we have to, a couple things. I always like to look, first we have to come back to kind of our foundations of health. And I really like to look at it like a dining table. So if you imagine you're going out on date night or you're going out to like a nice meal with friends and you're at a dining table, it's got 4 legs. And each of those legs represents like our real foundations of health, which for me are sleep, movement.
You call sleep one?
Sleep is one.
Wow,
yeah.
okay.
Yeah, I'd say sleep is number one. Well, it's hard to have a hierarchy, but we'll put them in this order for now. Sleep, nutrition, functional movement before fitness, and then stress, pleasure, which I combine together because if you are stressed, it's really hard to have pleasure. Like every woman knows that if you're stressed, it's hard to orgasm. If you're stressed, it's hard to laugh at a joke, right?
Yeah.
Like those are really important piece. So that might be number one, but I like to put sleep first for sure because it's kind of critical for repair.
Okay.
So a lot of the times we're reaching this age and we're trying to do all these things, right? We're trying to do workouts, we're trying to have a certain body, we're trying to handle all that we're handling, but we're not even sleeping 7 hours a night, which is critical for repair, as you know.
Yeah.
So we want to look first at this dining table and we're like, okay, we've got these 4 health pillars. If one of them's rickety, right? If one of them's not on where it should be, even in just foundations, before we ask athletic levels of output or all these other things we're doing, it's kind of an annoying dining experience. If 2 of them are rickety, someone's going to put their elbows on the table. It's going to be really annoying. You're going to be folding up some cardboard and jimmy rigging it right under that piece. If 3 are rickety, like your meal or your health is on the floor. And I think that's where a lot of us are at this stage because our adrenals are shot, because we're already handling so much, is that we've gotten so far away. Like we're out trying to eat certain ways or, work out certain ways or handle all the stressors of life. And we don't have our foundations on. So we're not sleeping the minimum of 7 to 9 hours a night. We're not eating in a way that supports our blood sugar and for our metabolism or our metabolic type. We're not even just walking 7 to 10,000 steps a day. And we're not managing our stress or recognizing it. And that's when we get into real trouble because our body has all these functions in it and they're all connected. And when we start to have a loss of function, it doesn't matter how much of a calorie deficit we're in or how much of a burn we're getting, the body just kind of shifts into that unsafe place. And then we store fat. And it's really frustrating for women because they're working so hard and they're getting fewer and fewer results.
So what I'm hearing is it's not just as simple as eating less and working out more.
It is not.
Because I
think you know that.
I think it's hilarious when we obviously do a lot of advertising.
Yeah.
And then somebody will just be in the comments and they'll be like, all you have to do is eat less and move more.
Yeah.
It's like, well, I mean, there's an ounce of truth behind that for sure. Like that is part of the equation, but there's so many other factors that come into play.
Absolutely.
So I love the dining table metaphor.
Yeah.
So then when it comes to your nutrition, let's start there.
Yeah.
Are there specific things to avoid? Are there specific myths that women believe that they need to be listening to or following when this menopause rolls around?
Yes.
And then what should they do instead?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think for like the basic foundations, and I really like to look at it like we teach our kids to read I'm all about the metaphors. It's how I learn.
I love metaphors. I'm a big metaphor guy.
Good. We teach our kids to read first by like teaching them the letters of the alphabet and then the sounds of the letters. And then we bring those letters together. And I think our health, our nutrition, like our fitness has to be the same in a real step-by-step building way. Yeah. So for nutrition, before we get fancy and try out all these different things, we need to make sure like we know the letters of the alphabet, which is really like eating consistently for consistent blood sugar. Because if our blood sugar is off, then our cortisol is going to be off, our insulin's going to be up, and we're not producing hormones. Like when cortisol's up and stress is up in the body, because it doesn't know when it's getting its food supply.
Right.
And that's where I think we run into a lot of people are not eating breakfast, not eating enough during that time.
Just save calories usually.
Exactly. And so then their body shifts into that low battery mode, and now they're working out, they're eating less, and they're gaining. So I really am a big fan of like when we're healing, when we're supporting hormonal health, we're like eating within 2 hours of waking, we're eating 4 to 5 hours later, 4 to 5 hours later, and eating enough in those to get us to that next meal.
How many times a day do you usually eat?
3 to 4, depending on like if I'm in a lifting phase or if I'm, depending on what phase of my cycle I'm in. If I need more, I just have that 4th snack.
And so your nutrition will depend on your training.
Absolutely.
You kind of build out around that. And then, so for other women that are trying to get their nutrition dialed in, is there a specific set of macros that you follow, or is there a specific type of diet that you recommend, or how do you go about it usually?
Yeah, so I really believe that we want to kind of figure out our own fuel mixture in macros, and that I think it is genetically based, not on necessarily our metabolic burn, but how our cells genetically metabolize and turn food into energy in the body. And so that's really going to determine, I think, our macros a little bit more than anything, right? If we're a fast metabolizer in our actual cells, we're going to need more slow burning fuels. That's where you'll see someone do better on a much higher protein, fat, smaller carbohydrate diet. Whereas if you're a slow metabolizer in your cells, then we need faster burning fuel. And that's where we're going to do better with larger amounts of complex carbohydrates. And you really only start to know that. I mean, we can do a test for sure to get to know that, but we only know that if we pay attention, right? If we take the time to recognize
and test something, and adjust based on how your body responds.
Yeah, and figure out what works for you. Right. And I think, that's really where the Period Whisperer kind of came in. It's like we got to listen to the whispers of our body and not just kind of.
Is that why it's named that?
Yeah. Okay. So, and our period's a big whisper there for sure. It tells us, and if we don't listen to the whispers, they're going to turn into screams anyway. But that's where that comes from. But
nice.
But I would say like consistent eating, and then of course eating enough. Those are the 2 biggest mistakes I see women in these years that are impacting their hormones.
Why do you think that is?
I think that culture has taught us not to be smaller. I think that as women, we focus on being less instead of being more. And so we don't eat enough, and we think that's what we're supposed to do to feel better in our bodies.
Yep.
And I just think it's baloney.
Yep. Yep. That's like one of our main angles is start eating more. And like, honestly, when we have people that come to us and they want to work with like one of our coaches on like one of our most, like one of the top selling programs we have is just a custom diet plan. It's not custom training, just custom diet plan with one of our programs. And one of the most common questions that we get when somebody gets their plan is this my plan?
Yeah. Because
they're confused at how much food is actually on their plan, and they struggle to eat all of that food. And like, I think on our episode, I might have been telling you about my mom. She's on one of our programs as well. And she was telling me the other day, like a couple of weeks ago now, she was like, she's like, I'm just eating all the time and I'm losing weight. And it's like, most people don't associate those together.
Yeah.
Because mainstream media is telling you to eat less.
Yeah.
And people in Instagram comments are telling you to eat less and move more.
Yeah.
And they say that that's the equation.
Yeah.
And so.
Which clearly doesn't work. Which is why we're
otherwise
here.
Everybody be in shape.
Yeah.
If it was that simple, everybody be in shape.
Yeah.
So then how does your training, what do you do with your training? How do you make your training match, or how do you make your diet match your training? What will your training look like, and how would your diet be adjusted based on what type of training you're doing? And does your training change as you hit menopause?
Yeah, I do for sure. I think the priority number 1 is always we got to listen. So if we're in a place in our body as women where we are having symptoms more than 20% of our life. So symptoms like that undeserved weight gain, like irregular or heavy periods, like not sleeping, like all of these things that we hear, hot flashes, night sweats, anxiety. If you're in that position, then we need to kind of dial right back and focus on that functional movement first. So let's focus on our nutrition, focus on our sleep, and just getting those 7,000 to 10,000 steps in a day. Is that enough? Is like a 300 calorie deficit for you to lose weight. But it'll also keep your body in a safe place. So once we know the function is solid in our body, and we'll know that because you're feeling, again, your symptoms are limited to like 20%. The fact that I'm going through this transition, I'm going to have some symptoms. And after that, I really like to look at, and this is why I love what you guys talk about, like the piece of really focusing on putting on muscle. So I like to look at my year as like, okay, let's do a 3 to 4 month block of weightlifting specifically, interspersed with yoga and expansion, because our muscles are always limited to their flexibility. So we want to make sure we're getting that weightlifting in a way that is maintainable for us, which I love that you guys do. It's like, let's meet people where they're at.
Yeah.
And interspersed, and just listening to your body. If you're in a pocket where you're like, I'm tired, we don't need to push that day. We can just walk, we can just stretch, and then we come back to it when we have that energy. Because you shouldn't be gassed at the end of your
burning
workout.
yourself out.
Yeah, because we have so many other priorities. Right. Yeah, you have to have enough energy to get through your day, the things you have to do. And if your workout is stealing that energy, then it's going to rob it from the other parts of your body. Yeah. And you'll suffer.
And then you're going to not enjoy the route or the process that you're going through.
Yes.
And that's going to lead to you quitting.
Absolutely. Or fat storing, which is kind of the opposite of what we're going for.
Yeah. And I think that goes into like, people think that in order to get in shape, they have to like give up their life.
Yeah.
And they can't have any kind of social fun, and they have to live in the gym.
Yeah. Which I think is not true.
Yeah. That's like kind of like our whole angle is like,
yeah,
don't do any of that.
Yeah.
Because I think I said it on your podcast as well. I've always said that the best diet, the best training plan is just the one that you'll do.
Yes. I love that.
So I don't care if I gave you the blueprint, the perfect plan for you to get in the body of your dreams, but it's too difficult or doesn't match your lifestyle or it's going to burn you out or you're not going to enjoy it, then it doesn't matter if you have the perfect plan.
Yes.
Because you're not going to last longer than 3 weeks.
Absolutely. And I think you're right. This idea that we have to be in the gym or we have to be having long workouts is totally bunk. Like I know at my age, so I'll be 43 this year. I work out less than I ever did, and I'm in better shape than I ever was.
Wow.
Work out less.
What do you attribute that to?
I think being really clear on these foundations, first and foremost, on really prioritizing weights over cardio, which was a big thing for me in the past, for sure.
Was it?
Yeah, absolutely. It was like always a good, 2-3 workouts a week, or it was always even a part of my weighted workouts. It was like
the cardio was.
The cardio was, yeah. So lifting heavier, things like
that.
And
why did you start there?
Yeah.
And that was before you kind of got educated on it all, or why did it start there?
I think it started there because that's what I always was told and taught. And then I still had that like little voice in my head of like, oh, I gotta burn this much in order to get results. I wasn't thinking about weights in the way I think about weights and cardio as like cardio just requires energy from you. So it's kind of like buying a car. Really fun sometimes, really great, kind of necessary, but you don't get anything back. The moment you drive that car, you're losing the value of that investment. Whereas weights is like investing in a house. It's like that longer term investment. Yes, it requires energy, that down payment to get in, but then it creates so much more energy for your body. It creates better burn. It supports your hormones. So it's a way better, smarter investment for your body.
That's one of the best metaphors I think I've ever heard.
Well, thank you.
Nice. Okay, so then what does your training look like right now?
Yeah, so I am in a lifting block, and what that looks like is I'm usually lifting 4 times a week. And I like to do like 2 days of lifting, a day of yoga, 2 days of lifting, a day of yoga, and then a completely day off.
Okay.
And so that's like a 30 to 40 minute lifting day.
And so you're lifting, what does that consist of?
So for me right now, what I'm loving is like really heavy weights with like the best form, which is, I was telling you on my podcast, one of my favorite things about following you on Instagram is your form checks at all times.
Oh, yeah.
I think people miss out on getting such great results from their workouts because they don't have that form.
Yeah. And just the smallest changes can make such a big difference.
Absolutely. Yeah. Even just the holding in of the core that I don't think even before I was a trainer, I really understood myself. And it's really hard to communicate that to people at all times if they're not getting cued. So I'm like a big 12 reps as heavy as I can right now is what I'm doing. 3 sets, 12 reps. With alternating kind of quad sets and supersets.
Okay. Quad sets.
Quad sets. So 4, just 4 exercises, 3 rounds before and then the next.
No rest.
No rest. 4 quad sets. Oof. Yeah.
I don't know if I could do that. Supersets are hard enough. That's just 2.
So that's what I'm loving right now for me. That's what's working for me. Yeah. And I will do that depending on my cycle. So for women, when we hit this PMS week, or it's called your luteal phase, I like to pull my weights entirely about 3 days before I menstruate.
Interesting.
Yeah, because that's when really, and especially in perimenopause, our progesterone is really it's like a shy hormone. It's really sensitive to cortisol. So when it starts, it's supposed to be kind of showing up and staying and decreasing slowly after we ovulate. And if we don't have enough of it because stress is there, that's when we run into sleep issues. That's when we run into, not like hitting into that high cortisol. So we don't have our recovery hormones. And we just tank and we get cranky. We can get, emotional, anxious, all those things. But the sleep, I think, is the biggest kicker. So if I don't have enough progesterone, then I'm going to not be able to recover from those workouts.
And how would you know that you don't have enough progesterone?
I think a few signs. I mean, we can test, certainly, absolutely. But I think you can tell in your own body. Like for women, I'm going to be super open about bleeding here. So if you have a really heavy period or you have like clots in your period, you know you don't have enough progesterone for sure. If you're having like brown at the beginning or the end, you likely are struggling with that as well.
And is it age related at all?
Well, because we know, I mean, this can happen for women at any age for sure.
Okay.
But we're going to be more sensitive to it in these like midlife years because the hormones in general are decreasing and they're going through that transition. So instead of like going through life with your hormones kind of being walking on solid ground, it's like you're on a suspension bridge all of a sudden. So any like movement is really hard for everything to kind of stay where it needs to stay.
Okay.
So yeah, that progesterone's really, really important. And any stress, and obviously working fitness by nature is stressing your body out, is going to make it like a little precarious. And we don't want to shift into that low battery mode, that fat storage mode. And we need the energy to make this transition and feel well and good. So I pull it there and probably for the first 3 days of my period until I can feel my energy come back.
So you change it every month?
Every month. So if I'm following a workout program like yours, and it's like, 4 week blocks in a 3 month, it's going to take me, a 4 week block's going to take me 5 weeks because I pull all my fitness for 1 week.
And then you go back to it after.
Yeah, absolutely.
Interesting. So you recommend that to all the women?
I do, because I'm like, you got to listen to your body. If we all could go off to like a yoga retreat or somewhere and didn't have any of these, any of these other stressors in life, I think we could probably handle it all the way, all the time. But I believe ultimately women, their whole lives should be working out like this.
So during that week, what do you recommend?
Sleep.
Okay.
Always functional movement. Like we need to move our bodies. I mean.
And by functional movement, explain.
Oh, walking. I think things that your body is required that's not adding more stress to your body. So walking.
And do you do it outside? Do you do it on an incline, on a treadmill? Do you go hiking?
Yeah, I would prefer just like outside is it would be the best. Any walking will take it. If you're someone who works on your feet all day, like maybe you're a nurse, then you might be getting your steps in that way. So maybe we don't need to add it in. But I love getting outside, especially first thing in the morning for a walk is so great. It's great for our circadian rhythm.
Yep.
And having a solid circadian rhythm is critical to having a solid infradian rhythm, which is our female sex hormones.
Okay.
So if you don't have that, then you're kind of snookered for the other one anyway.
Okay.
And then I love walking after meals. So I think a morning walk and an afternoon walk would be like killer because you're going to regulate your blood sugar.
Yep.
You're probably going to sleep better.
I was literally just listening to a Huberman episode.
I love Huberman.
Him talking about how much you regulate your blood sugar by just going on a short walk right after you eat. Like
Absolutely.
it's a drastic difference.
It's a drastic difference. Like, and it only needs to be like 10 minutes.
Yeah.
And, half the world has dogs. You and I were talking about that earlier.
Yeah.
Like, your dog needs to be walked in the morning and in the evening at least. So, like, there you go. It's already a done deal.
Just not if it's too hot.
Yeah, it's true. That's why the
too
morning
hot, put
and
the little booties on or wait.
Yeah.
I hate when I see people walking their dogs in the middle of the day, well, at least here in Vegas.
Yeah.
In Ohio, it's fine.
Yeah, right.
But here it's
Vegas,
not.
Phoenix, it's the same. Morning and night anyway, because it's going to be a better time for your dog.
And then do you track your steps every single day?
I think whenever I'm starting something new, I track. I mean, now I have the little circles on my iWatch, so it kind of already tells me if I'm going to hit that goal.
Yeah.
But I know pretty much, and the more if you just focus on something for a couple weeks, we know like what that is. So I know if I walk a 30-minute walk in the morning with the dog and 30-minute walk in the evening, then I'm going to hit those 7,000 to 10,000 steps.
And then, so what are some other tips you can think of for, like, you've talked about sleep a lot, and really emphasize the importance of that.
Yeah.
And I agree wholeheartedly. What are some other things that women or men can do to help to set that circadian rhythm, because it's so important? Yeah.
So I think there's a couple key things. Like one, having a really regular sleep and wake time. So, and I know a lot of people love this. They love to kind of have their late nights or their time, but
even if you have late night, I'm a late nighter.
Are you? Okay.
And so it's like, I'm never going to be I shouldn't say never. I don't like saying never, but
You're young.
Currently I'm not the type of person I'm not a 5 a.m.er.
Yeah.
Not a 6 a.m.er.
Yeah.
Sometimes I'm a 7 a.m.er.
Yeah.
But most of the time I'm like 7:30, 8 a.m.er, and I'm to work by 9.
Yeah.
But that's because I'm going to bed at like midnight.
Yeah.
And so I like to make sure that I'm getting my 7 to 8 hours.
Yeah. Perfect.
And so I have that still, but I'm still a late nighter. So I guess as long as you're not up to like 2 or 3.
No, I think consistency. And I think it's different, like depending on your life, it's like consistency. Like if you can go to bed around the same time and wake up around the same time, like especially midlife, I think for our hormones, because we're going through a transition, it's a real energy supply and demand game. We have a greater energy demand, so we need to meet that demand with enough energy supply, or we need to decrease the demand. And if the body's guessing where it's going to get its energy supply, like when am I going to get my sleep? When am I going to get my food? When am I going to get my pleasure, which is another big source of energy? Then it's going to shift into that low battery mode because it has to store to be prepared for whenever it's getting it next because it doesn't know. So consistency is like really an amazing tool, I think, when you're going to bed, when you're waking up, when you're eating. If you can make those pillars consistent, it's going to take a lot of thinking out of your body so that it can get back to healing or doing what it's trying to do right now.
Yeah, that's great. And you said, I've never actually heard someone say that the pleasure system is also on a cycle.
Yeah. Oh, so pleasure is cyclical for women. Is that what you mean? But I was thinking pleasure is such a critical part of what creates energy supply for us.
Okay.
Right? Like if you think about like when you fall in love or when you go to a concert or when you're doing something new, you get that real aliveness feeling.
Okay.
And during that time, you're not thinking about eating. You're not thinking about anything else, right? So pleasure in general.
So would you relate that to mental health then, do you think?
Yeah. I mean, I absolutely think. I think if we're not having any pleasure, that's going to impact our mental health.
Right.
Is that what you mean?
Yeah. I mean, so like, do you think, because obviously like, I'm not a woman, I've never been through menopause, but I would assume, and what I've heard from like my mom and other women is that their mental health does get really affected by it.
Absolutely.
And obviously that's driven by a lot of things changing and them probably putting on a little bit of weight and becoming a little less confident in themselves. How do you think mental health does get affected
during this transition? I think it can massively because, again, we are dealing with the hormonal fluctuations. So if we are suffering, like where we don't have those consistency, we don't have that consistent circadian rhythm to create in those consistent health foundations, then this transition is going to be even harder than our body. And if we don't have enough of the hormones that we need, then it will impact our mental health. I do think a big chunk of what impacts our mental health, though, is the fact that we are recognizing these things that we're bothered by or we're feeling really unsettled in life, and we don't have the capacity or the bandwidth to deal with it right now, or we're not supported in that, which I think is where we have a lot of opportunity in this life. We really need to take a look at this time as like, okay, I almost need to slow down a little to really look at the things in my life that I'm not settled with, that I'm not happy with, that aren't working, and figure those things out before I get back to my 20-step to-do list that I'm making important right now.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
And so creating like almost like a checklist, basically backing up, taking a 30,000 foot view.
Yeah.
And looking at the things that you're struggling with, except because obviously women at that stage of their life, they have, I mean, we talked about this off air. We're talking about like careers and children and their spouse and a full-time career versus like when you're in your 20s, you're motivated. It's easy to work out. It's easy to get results. You feel good. You got energy. You want to have sex. You have all these things, And so as you get older, it changes a lot.
Yeah.
And so what do you think are like the biggest struggles for women when they do hit menopause?
Like symptom-wise or recovering-wise? I mean, I think
probably both, because those kind of go hand in hand. It's like what they deal with the most, and then how they get through that.
Okay, so the biggest things, I think the most common symptoms I really hear, I think, are sleep for sure as an issue. Anxiety, I think, and anxiety can.
And so the sleep gets worse.
It gets more challenging for women. And again, I think our hormones get blamed. We're like, oh, but I really want women to know, like, it's your hormones are in a transition, and we can support a lot of that. And if there's a loss of function and we need to look at like bioidenticals or something so that we don't have to suffer, like that's available to you for sure, and not to suffer.
And what do you mean by that?
So everything in our body is really connected. I like to look at it like an orchestra. We have our hormones, our immune system, our digestion, our detoxification, our energy production, our nervous system, and they're connected like an orchestra. So if, one instrument goes off, so say the trumpet goes off, it starts playing a bit of a wonky tune, it's going to, knock the violin off, it's going to knock the winds off, and so on. And a month later, they're not even playing the same song. And this is what I think happens a lot in our body, and we think, oh, it's our hormones. But, we can't go back in and just fix the trumpet, for example. We have to go back and kind of fix the entire function of the body and make sure that all the function is working. Just like if you were vacuuming and there's a plug in the vacuum will still turn on, but it's not sucking anything up. So we have to fix the function of the body. And when we do that and we recognize that there's still not enough hormones for the body to sleep, for you to do your foundations, that's when we want to look at some hormonal support for women. Like, again, so bioidenticals, which are going to be hormones, plant-derived, that are going to teach the body how to kind of recreate more of those hormones again, or hormone replacement if you need it down the way. But I like to start with bioidenticals.
Do you think hormone replacement is a good option for women?
I do, as long as they've done the work first, because hormone replacement or bioidenticals, they only address the production, the amount of hormones. They don't address the metabolization or the absorption. So this is why a lot of women can go out and take hormone replacement and not actually see much of a difference or not enough of a difference. So we do have to, again, come back to these foundations, make sure they're in place there so that we know that the body's going to absorb these hormones that we're now giving and metabolize them appropriately. Otherwise, we're just adding more mess to the mix.
And so what would you say is kind of backing up a little bit, what would you say is step one for a woman who thinks that she's starting to get into perimenopause?
Yeah. Okay. So step one would be, let's look at these foundations again. So let's make sure I'm being really consistent on when I'm going to bed, when I'm waking up, when I'm eating. And am I eating enough? I think eating enough, specifically protein, of course, but all the macros, I'd say. Am I eating enough, and what's my fuel mixture? Can I get this functional movement in every single day? And am I managing my stress every single day? And when we have that, I think it becomes, really clear on the next steps. Because if you're doing that consistently, and this is probably another thing I think women need to know, is that we seem to think we can get results in 2 weeks, like maybe we did in our 20s and early 30s. But we didn't get here to our 40s in 2 weeks. So it's almost like we're in health debt. If you're having a lot of symptoms, you're in health debt.
Health debt.
Yeah, and you got to get back to the black before you're ever going to start to create savings to see what your body can do again. So it's going to take, and I think it can take 6 to 16 weeks of healing in these main foundations of consistency before we can make that down payment on that house, right? So I think getting out of that health debt. So if you're consistent with these 4 things and you're not getting results, you're not feeling better, that's when you probably want to reach out to a functional practitioner or something to get some support, because there's got to be a loss of function, and we can work on healing that.
And so do you think this just starts everybody should start this at a certain age, or when they start feeling certain effects or symptoms? Or
That's a great question. In an ideal world, I think we would start this, as young as we could before we have symptoms.
And what is it as young as we could?
I mean, I think
in a range.
Yeah, I think in an ideal world, if we'd be testing our hormones and the function of our body once or twice a year, starting in our 20s.
Okay.
Because you're thinking about as a woman in your 20s, but men too. We are thinking about eventually having children and big transitions that are going to impact our hormones and our health. But I would say, at 35 as a woman, whether you're feeling good or not, I would be starting to really focus on how can I know my hormones? Because the more you know what your hormones levels are when you feel good, that's going to make it really easy for you to get back there every time we test.
Okay.
So that's what I'd say.
Okay. And then as they go through menopause or post-menopause, how does that change?
I mean, I still think, it would be ideal not to wait till we have symptoms, because symptoms are
I feel like that's probably what most women do.
Yeah, we wait until there's symptoms for sure. And I think and the biggest symptom often, is weight gain. I think that's where people really focus. But I think of weight gain, it's like the canary in the coal mine. It's by the time you gain weight, so many other things have gone off.
Yeah.
That's the last thing.
Right.
And that means so many things have to go right for that to go away. And that's a really important thing, I think, for us to recognize. So before you're going to see results on a scale, you're going to have to see that your sleep is better, your energy is better, your libido's back up, your period's regulated if you have one still.
And they do all that just through the sleep, the nutrition, the exercise.
Absolutely. This is what, like, we look at
back to the dinner table.
Yeah, back to the dinner table. I mean, you look at all the wild animals or all the animals of the world. What do they make sure to do every day? They move, they sleep, they eat, they play, or they have sex. Like, these things happen for them no matter what. These are our foundational pillars of health. And if we don't, like those kindergarten ABCs, if we don't have those in place, we're going to struggle. And perimenopause makes it harder because we have this transition. So that's when it's going to show up. It's probably there before, but we had more capacity, more vital reserve to handle it.
Okay. And so last question.
Yeah.
For someone who did wait too long.
Yeah.
And they did wait until they have symptoms.
Yeah.
What is a, let's say, 3-step process to changing that? And I'm honestly thinking about my mom right now.
Yeah. For
and
sure.
So like for someone who has hit menopause or they're past it, post-menopause, and they've gained weight and they're struggling and things aren't changing like they used to, what's the first 3-step process you would do for them?
Okay. So I think we have 2 paths. One, you can just go out and like work with a functional practitioner, get your testing done so we can find those hidden stressors, but that's not going to change.
And when you say functional practitioner, what exactly do you mean?
Yeah, so functional practitioners look at the body on a subclinical level. So we don't look to diagnose anything specifically. That's what doctors do. They're there to be able to like give us a test and be like, this is what's wrong with you. A functional practitioner looks at the body to test, the actual function. So not, to know like it's not just what the amount of the hormones, but the relationship of the hormones and are they staying in the balance that they should. It's not just the amount of cortisol, it's the cortisol pattern and how it should be in a healthy person.
Okay.
It's digestion, it's detoxification. So we want to make sure not just that the body is creating what it should, but that the pathways to creating that are appropriate and healthy, like that vacuum I was talking about, like the tube is clean. So you can work with someone to have testing done to get to know like what's going on in all the systems of the body. But that's really powerful. I think it was a very humbling thing for me to do testing. I was like, oh. Like,
when did you do that?
I did my most recent test I did back in like January, and it was shocking.
Really recent.
But yeah, I've done them in the past, but I like to do them as often as I can.
How often do you recommend?
I mean, once a year.
Okay.
Yeah, at least. But I was able to see that I had like a bacteria in my guts and that was asymptomatic. So, that's a stress on the body. So we don't realize we've got all these little stresses. I was able to see that I wasn't breaking down proteins, which is a really important thing for someone like me who's lifting weight, trying to put on muscle. So I wasn't breaking them down, which means I wasn't absorbing them. I was able to see that, like the balance of my estrogen and progesterone was still off. And I work really hard on myself. So I was able to take the correct supplements to kind of support and rectify that.
And what are a couple of those supplements?
Well, let's see. I think for the bacteria, I had to take like an H. pylori, which is a bacteria in the stomach line. I had to take that is designed naturopathically to eliminate that. For some people, we need pharmaceuticals for that. I had to take enzymes to help break down my proteins. And then as well as a liver support supplement because I had too much progesterone and testosterone, which is not what we see in a lot of women. Usually that's the opposite. So I had to make sure I was metabolizing those, and take some estrogen support. So for me, that was like making sure I had enough to balance out that progesterone and bring it back into play.
Okay.
So those are where the bioidenticals come in for women. Mm-hmm.
Cool. So is there anything else you would like to share? Any last pieces of advice for anybody listening?
Yeah, I think, my favorite way to always end my podcast is like be more in your life and not just less on a scale, focus on taking up space and really listening to what your body says so that you can start to trust her again. Because if given half a chance, the body can heal itself. And a lot of the answers are in there. So take the time to figure this out right now. And I think you'll have an amazing next several decades. Yeah. And where can we find you? Yeah, thanks. So you can come check me out at the Period Whisperer podcast. You can hear Vince's episode there, which is great. I'm always hanging out on Instagram at Bria_period_whisperer or on my website, briatheperiodwhisperer.com. Perfect. Well, thank you so much for being here. This is a great episode. We don't do a ton of these in person. And so this was nice. And I think you're like right in line with
what a lot of our listeners are experiencing.
Yeah.
And I don't really talk about this that much because I'm not super educated or familiar with it like you are. And so it was really cool to learn from you, and hopefully everybody listening learned a bunch of as well.
Yeah, well, thank you so much. I want the women who are doing your amazing programs to get the results that they deserve. So I think if they start with these foundations, they're going to get VSHREDed.
Hell yeah. Well, thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks, Vince.
Now, if you are looking for some extra support and you aren't looking to spend a fortune, you should consider working with one of our VSHRED certified coaches. We'll figure out your macros, we'll figure out your calories, we'll figure out what your custom meal plan will look like. And yes, we'll make sure that it contains your favorite foods. And basically all you do is you let your coach know what you like, what you don't like, because when we say custom, we mean it. And you get unlimited emails, you get weekly check-ins, you get access to our brand new coaching app where you can message them at any time about anything with any questions. Our coaches are here to help you reach your goals, and they care about your success. And so all the details about how it works is in the description down below. So check that out if you want to. But thank you again for tuning in. Until next time.
Thanks for tuning in to today's episode of VSHRED's Better Body, Better Life podcast. Whether you're doing one of our programs, taking our supplements, or just doing things on your own, tune in every week for exclusive content with Vince, VSHRED trainers, and special guests as they share valuable tips around motivation, workouts, food, and living a healthier lifestyle. See you next time.